Back to another tutorial. So in this video what we're going to do is look at how I concepted the pulse rifle pistols. Well, not rifles, but yeah, pistols. So what you see is early stages, I block out the key forms. So I use the edit poly modifier, really focus on box modeling, get a bit of scale reference in there as well with a scanned in arm that I have, some gloves. And then what I like to do is use the chamfers to work kind of non-destructively really, and here I'm just drawing over the key forms. So I'm working in sort of a non-destructive way within the stack, so I can control the chamfers via the edit poly. And then what I like to do is sort of begin that cutting phase where I can quickly cut out shapes and key features based upon my design idea. Sometimes I end up going back to the design idea for a few times, like a few iterations, which is perfectly fine. You know, I often teach my students to, you know, creativity is a iterative process. So if you have to go back and just iron out and flush out a few ideas, it's definitely worth doing. Here you can see me using the edit poly stack again to add more chamfers, although I could have controlled these a little bit better by supplementing the chamfers with the edge selection and then using a chamfer modifier to pull in that selection and chamfer them. That would have given me a bit more control, and if I needed to go back I could have edited them or switched them off quite easily. However, I think for this one, because it was just a quick lunch break piece, it was not something that I planned to go back on. I was just interested in getting in some key forms and a bit of modeling practice really. Here you can see me making use of the edit geometry. If you've watched my videos in terms of the concepts that I produce, I try not to worry about topology too much at this stage, because I can always go back and construct a base mesh, if you like, over the top of these models and really add some cleanup and polish. These type of models are ideal again for early concepting. They're really good for establishing form, and if you're working in a studio or you've got a producer or maybe a senior, they're really good to show off some of the concepts and ideas that you might have to develop further. And because you've got the block mesh here or the cut mesh, it's quite easy to then construct your base models, either, you know, for film, whether it's going to be a game, whether you're going to do, you know, your retop and your bakes and stuff, because you've still got that detail there. Here you can see me again making use of a cut. So I'm modifying this cut piece from the Swift cut tool that I've got available on the website. So what I've done here, I've just brought in a rectangle and I'm cutting in where I envision sort of the emission or the enemy energy shooting out from. So I'm just trying to cut in that bit of detail there to make the model look a bit more interesting and give it visual depth. A little bit later on I do add a lighting to this, so it's yeah, pretty cool. There's a bit of times in here as well where I duplicate the cuts. So what I like to do as well is reuse pieces of the model. So you can see here where I've zoomed in on this bit and I need to sort of duplicate that cut to carry on the detail onto another model within the scene. So here I think it's the main barrel section where I'm just trying to edit and sort out, and I can reuse this cut as well for the lower receiver. So I'm able to cut out pieces like really precisely, and then when I do put the chamfer modifier on, it looks like these are interconnected pieces, like they sit really nice and flush together, yet you can still see sort of panel lines or separation marks to distinguish the difference between the separate elements of the model. So I'm constantly trying to do that, I'm constantly trying to achieve that. And again, these different modeling techniques, you don't always have to default using the chamfer in here. A lot of people like to take these models, and it's something that I do as well, is to take these models out into a program like ZBrush, where I can dynamesh them and polish them up really nicely. So as long as I've got a good block mesh and this has, you know, quite a lot of geometry, I think it was a little bit lenient on some of the geometry here, should have maybe used a bit more. But as long as I've got really good geometry, the dynamesh works a treat, especially on unchamfered edges. It likes the hard edges, and again, it's really good for CAD models as well. So taking it into a program like ZBrush to do the polish is a really good step that I like to do. And again, here I'm just testing the form, and obviously as this is going to be a concept piece, I need to ensure that the surface detail remains polished and clean. Now it's a little bit tricky to do this, and what you need to do is use a weighted normal modifier. The reason it's tricky is because of the workflow that I'm using, where I'm not sticking to quads, so traditional quads or tries. There's a lot of n-gons in here, and n-gons are renowned for causing problems in surface detail. So the easiest way for me to get around it, especially on these conceptual models, is for me to use the weighted normal modifier, and then I can just clean it up, and on the renders the surfaces look a lot softer, they look a lot more polished. So it's a really good workflow. Here you can just sort of see me editing the trigger. So I did this via the line tool, and there's a little bit of an issue with the topology where it's causing some overlap, so I'm just trying to sort that out the best that I can. And again, I've switched to the chamfer being rounded, as I prefer that. It seems to give me better results in the workflow, so I like to use that. Again, with the trigger, I've just started with a rect piece from the Swift Cut tool, so it just really easily just allows me to bring in these cuts like really easily, or these features that I'm going to use. I can just click a button and it'll jump into the scene, and that's kind of what I'm after really. So it just speeds up the workflow. Again, with the Swift Cut tool, you can do a lot of this stuff by default in Max anyway. I just find it a little bit quicker to have that tool there and utilize it, and there's a few other benefits to it about creating on top of a surface face and stuff like that. So it's really quick. Here again, I'm using the modifying stack just to add in detail. So I'm just thinking of establishing a quick trigger. We'll chamfer that up. So I've got a few issues with the chamfer there, and just added that bit of detail. I didn't actually cut in the trigger. Some of my weapon systems I actually like to cut in and put the detail inside, so when you break apart the model you can see all the inner working parts. On this instance I didn't do it. Again, it's not something that I thought was going to be helpful to the practice and what I was aiming to achieve. So on this section here again, this is a part where I've reused a cut. So I've reused that upper receiver of the trigger house, the upper receiver. I've changed that and I've used it as part of the cut. And again, I'm just checking the scale here and just making sure that it fits roughly within a human-sized hand. There's no point in having a huge pistol if a character can't hold it in the actual game or the film. If it's going to be a 3D printed prop, you're going to want to make sure that people can actually handle this weapon system. So it's really important to bring in those references, and that was a scan. That's one of my own arm scans that I did. So that's just something personal that I use. There's loads of others that you can use, plenty of free ones online as well, so I definitely encourage that in part of your modeling practice. And again, here you can see me just checking detail. And I've got at this stage now, I've got the key bits of detail in here. So I've got most of the key bits of detail now, or certainly the large to medium elements, and now I'm concentrating on adding those small detail. I have got some problems here with the weighted normal, so I've got to adjust that in the layer stack to ensure that it gives me the best results. I could probably hide a lot of the noise with a render and some smart material setup, so when I create the materials, if I create the correct geometry right, it should look okay. Here I'm just testing the design. I think this gets removed because there's an issue with the chamfer overall, so it gets removed a little bit later on, because it doesn't quite chamfer and cut correctly. And again, that perhaps may be where you would take it into a program like ZBrush and you can use a lot more topology and you can create cleaner cuts for this. So I think I've done this bit before. I've shown you how to get panel lines in, and again, I really like to use the line tool, do an extrusion with a shell modifier, and then it gives me control over the line thickness in the Boolean settings. You can add extra geometry behind the lines if you wanted to block that in a little bit more. For the purposes of this, it wasn't necessary to do it. I had a real tight line that was sat quite flush to each surface side, so the chances are you're not going to be able to see through it anyway within the render. Here I'm thinking of maybe some sort of bottom piece that detaches the top section. So I'm now moving on to something that when this is fired, because if you look at the design, it's not going to have an auto sort of barrel that comes back. So what I'm trying to do is add something that's animatable on here, so you can see it sort of fire. and I decided to go with like maybe some sort of trigger system or something like that's flipped, or something when it fires and it could be animated to make it a little bit more interesting in terms of the design and its functionality. So if you think of maybe a game or a first-person shooter, you know, having those subtle animations on weapon systems makes them a little bit better to use. So on this bit now, again, I'm just thinking about more detail on what I could potentially add to the model, and because it's sort of like I envisioned it to maybe be sort of like a pulse or maybe an energy type weapon system, I'm thinking maybe the barrel is going to get a little bit hot and it needs some cuts for cooling, or maybe these could be actual cuts that go all the way through. You know, they could easily be adapted and upgraded to go all the way through the model. So I'm thinking maybe add some you know, grill bits or something like that. You typically see on weapon systems, particularly like rifles and stuff, you'll see like holes in the barrels and stuff, like the flash guards and things, or muzzle flashy areas and stuff. So just thinking like maybe I could add something here if it's an energy based weapon, you know, give maybe a bit of a grill, or the indications of at least of a grill to get that. It could also be a grip as well. You know, if people are holding it slightly different, it could be a grip or something. Here, what is just a section that I was considering adding maybe some scope or sight to it. I never did actually add the detail in, but it's indicative of it, so this would be typically where it would sit. So there's a bit of an issue here as well with the chamfers, so I gotta sort of go in, clean this up and adjust the set amount there. So you can see the amount, I set that quite high initially because it was chamfering areas that I didn't want it to chamfer. So I'm just sorting this out, and again I'm just checking that weighted normal as well, and just seeing if I can get a better blend shape between the surfaces. So it's starting to shape up. You know, you can see here it looks quite good. There's a few other bits of detail that I need to add, sort of the screw detail and stuff. I think I opted to only go with one sort of screw or bolt here. And I wanted sort of a slot for your fingers or maybe thumb to sort of rest on. So what I created, and again these are typical what you would see maybe on a Glock or something like that. You'll see like a little imprint for your thumb or your finger. So I just wanted to create that to try and link it to something real, so there's a sort of believable element to the design. So it's more about like trying to relate it to real world practices and what we see in the real world, to try and compensate a little bit for the sort of quirkiness and clunkiness of the design really. So how I did this was with the sphere, and I just sort of edited that, and yeah, I got some quite nice results there with that section. So pretty good going. Got to mirror the bolts over as well, so we created some bolts, and again this was the idea. Maybe it's a catch, and you know, you can detach that and bring it off, and maybe, you know, if it was developed a little bit further, you know, you could see inside, or it could be where the battery pack goes or something for the energy system, and this is where we ended up. And here now we've got some quite you know, large surfaces in here, so I'm looking to sort of break these up a little bit more. What I decided is maybe to try and complement the catch system a little bit. So maybe there's a, you know, like maybe a thumb indentation or something. So you know, you hold it with one hand, click the buttons or the release catches, and then you can pull out with another indentation section. So it's just trying to link the design features up and trying to think about the functionality and practicality of the design. So everything on a weapon system is, you know, it's purposeful. There's reasons for it, and again I'm trying to think here how I could complement that and sort of include and yeah, complement each of the design areas. So you can sort of see here where I'm just adjusting this, experimenting with it, and just trying to get that visual detail right. I think I opted for a longer sort of feature here. So what I want to do is I test this out, and again I'm just zooming in and out just to see what it's like. At this bit I was thinking maybe to add more catches to it. I thought it might be a nice sort of supporting element to the trigger type object that's in there. I did decide against it. I didn't really like it, and I went back to having sort of a longer sort of grip channel where you can press the buttons and, you know, you can pull that top section off. I ended up with two distinct designs. So one of them was a red one and the other being blue. I couldn't decide which one was better, so let me know in the comments which one you think, and please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. I'll see you in the comments or the next video.